What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm the design lead of Summoner's Rift Team's live pod. I'm here to talk to you about changes that are on the 14.23 PBE. This video is, I guess, 5 days ahead of whatever I'll put out on Wednesday, which is going to be all of our reactive balance changes. But ultimately, this is here to give context on some of the larger or more impactful changes going into the next patch, into 14.23. So we got a couple topics to talk about. Of course, Ambessa went live for me at time of recording about 2.5 days ago. There are some iterations on Bounties. We'll talk about how they've gone and what we're going to be doing in this space. Talk about Aurora, Rell, and Smolder, who all have work going into this patch. Okay, so Ambessa, right now on day 2, right? She's been out for a little bit over 2 days. 40% win rate roughly on day 1, 42% win rate roughly on day 2, and 44-ish% win rate so far, if we're just measuring calendar days, right? Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. That's a little bit inexact. Obviously, Wednesday was only kind of half a day, etc., whatever. Point is, Ambessa is arguably gaining 2% win rate a day. Of course, you cannot sustain that. There's no way by next Wednesday she's a 60% win rate champion. That's not how that's going to work. So, of course, it will slow down. But what I will say is that I personally thought we were hitting 40% win rate day 0, and I landed it within 0.5% win rate. That was pretty sweet. I think our gameplay analysis estimate was 39%, so we, from the various angles, we were pretty close in this one, which is cool. It's good to see, right? Ambessa sort of landed about as powerful as we expected her to, which was targeting again, early game, early days, 40%, maybe slightly under percent win rate, so we got that. She's gaining win rate by day. We expect that as well. So yeah, we think we're on target so far. Of course, we think that is OP long term. That's just how this works. I don't think there is a world where we realistically are launching champions at balanced accounting for 3 years of players playing the champion. I think that is a ludicrous idea. I've always maintained that before I was on design, and now that I still maintain that. Now, this is not that this champ should be 50% win rate day 1. Again, we targeted 40 and we got 40, and good, right? I didn't really watch streamers playing the champion. I'm busy. I'm doing my day job during the day, but my understanding from just listening to the people talk around me is, of course, there's some people saying this champion is trash, can't do anything. I'm sure some people thought she was really OP day 1. I'm sure the entire gamut of emotions has been there, but generally speaking, pretty happy with how she launched, so that's good. Next patch, we will do some small QOL stuff if we see anything. Plus, of course, any tuning as needed. There's a decent chance we nerf her in 23 or 24, probably. But we'll see what happens, right? If she stops at 47% win rate in every elo and stops climbing, we'll probably leave her there, even though we think she's probably OP long term. If she's chilling at 47, we're okay. If she maintains a player base, and of course, if she's overly frustrating or something, or needs sharper matchup tables or something, then sure, fine, whatever, right? Let's move on. Ambessa generally, I was considering making this video last week before she launched. I never really found the drive to do so and spend the time on this one, but I want to talk about because I was involved in the process here. Why Ambessa has some of the things that she has. So I'll actually jump to the non sequitur. So an internal process change is I'm trying to think of the right words to describe this one. Basically, there is a somewhat official handoff late in the process where Summoner's Rift Team Live owns new champions before they come out. So Ambessa, for example, and she is the first one where I think we really said we're going to kick off this process and we're going to do it. So we had talked about it earlier on in the year. In the case of Skarner, the original champ designer was no longer at the company. So it was just like, actually, Phreak, you own all of Skarner. You're going to tune him and fix his bugs. And if we need to get a new animation on a spell, you're the designer in charge of driving that. That was most of that stuff was not me for Ambessa, right? Ambessa's champion designer did a great job making a really, really fun champion. I am not responsible for any of the individual spells in this kit by any means. I don't want to claim that I'm responsible for all the cool stuff on this champion. To talk about the things I had done in Ambessa, I basically rebuilt the damage logic on Q, not in a scripting sense, but in terms of Q had a lot of conditionals around how low people were, what was the ratio of sweet spot versus not, and I basically simplified the spell a lot to where it's there's Q1 and Q2, they have damages, and they have sweet spot and not sweet spot. And yeah, that means there's 4 damages on Q, but that made sense for the spell. There's literally 2 casts there and whatnot. I pulled back a lot of complexity on that spell. I basically was ultimately in charge of all the base damages and ratios and base stats and stuff. And in general, if it's like, hey, we really can't support this mechanic, we need to rip something out of the kit entirely, or we really need to add a new mechanic to the kit entirely, that could have been up to me. And if I had to like overrule Champ's team and say this champion is not balanceable unless we give her a new ultimate, I would have had that authority. I don't think that's true, but like that's the kind of space that I was working in, where if it's like, hey, we're going to own this champion long term for her long term balance state for the next 10 years to come. So we being SRT Live, be comfortable with the kind of champion we are shipping, such that we are willing to support this champion long term. And so a lot of things I try to hold myself to and hold the champion to, which is that she is roughly a skirmisher, that she's shaped in terms of damage output, mobility, durability, vaguely in the world of Riven. Riven's a pretty easy analog of like mobile, high damage champion. Now, the types of things Ambessa needs compared to what Riven needs are very different. Riven can jump over walls. Riven never runs out of resources. Riven stuns you for 2 seconds in her full combo. Ambessa doesn't, right? And so there's lots of differences here, and so it's not an apples to apples comparison. Ambessa and Aatrox have similarities. Ambessa and Vi have similarities. Ambessa and Nocturne have similarities. Like, none of these champions are one-to-one, but it's like, hey, what are the things Ambessa needs when we're saying, well, you're playing out fights in a certain way, here's how much damage you're allowed to deal. Like, for example, one of the things that I pushed for pretty hard and held us to, not to say that I had like a lot of pushback, but it was just like a sort of core, we'll call it thesis for the champion, is that she should typically not be able to one combo a Squishy. That she can't do Talon or Zed or even Riven levels of, I got on you so you instantly died from full. Now, this can change based on how much gold she has. We obviously know she's a gold scaler. One thing that we held her to that was core from her champion designer, and I was happy to uphold, was that she should really, really be like longsword focused. She should really try to build all the high AD items. That seems to be true. Eclipse and maybe Voltaic Cyclosword and Rav Hydra seem to be her best first slot items. Those are all very, very high AD caster type items. She's doing really, really well on Shojin's second slot. That looks really good as well. People tend to buy Death Dance on her. That does pretty well also. These are the kinds of items we wanted her to see. I really strongly did not want her to build lethality. If it's Voltaic into regular fire items, that's fine for me. We didn't want her to do like Iceborne Gauntlet Jack Show. We're not there. It's fine. We dodged that one as well. But hey, she should solidly be in the squishy side of the fighter space. That was important to the designers, important to me, her champ designer, and to me as well. And so like, I'm picking base damages and ratios and whatnot. I'm looking up every other champion who's I think should build relatively similar. I did a big comparison of like, how does Aatrox's damage scale from gold and levels? How does Riven's damage? How does Pantheon's damage? How do all these other champions that are in similar spaces, how do they all fare compared to this? I actually went and took every single skirmisher in the game and gave her mean skirmisher armor, MR, and health and attack damage, and I don't think I did attack speed, but I said your base stats need to be the mean of your class, and we'll balance you around this, because guess what? I am the, not only am I the base stat merchant, I'm the durability merchant. Ask any designer I work with, where it's like, hey, that's cute, you need your champion to function. You are not allowed to be squishier than the average champion of your class when we're launching you. Unless there's a special reason why, because you have a special mechanic like a Mumu E where you just block damage at all points in time. Okay, well, this is a always on durability mechanic. Yeah, your armor can be lower because you have functionally free armor because you take reduced damage from every physical instance. Yeah, of course, right? But without that existing, no, you have durability, and your win rate needs to come out from your damage or mobility otherwise, because we're not printing an assassin. We are explicitly not. So you're going to be durable. You're going to be moderately durable. Your life steal and shield or whatever have to be good enough that you are clearly durable. You can withstand some hits. You are melee. You do not get to one-shot people unless you have to be durable enough to survive not one-shotting people. And so that whole space was like where this is. So we can go back up then to earlier on in this thing and say, hey, why does she have all these various mechanics? And so one of the ones that I saw talked about online was, why does she have armor penetration and percent health damage? And the reason is so she can top lane. If she only deals flat damage, if the R passive isn't there, if the Q is only flat damage here, she is a mid laner. And she's probably an assassin, because there is no world in which she can deal with Steel Cap's Darius on a pure physical damage spell kit when the dashing does nothing. Like, the thing is, most top laners do not care about her passive. Darius and... So Aatrox is a terrible matchup, so it's not that one. But, like, Darius and, like, malfight in many cases. Before this is before she had armor pen, but like a lot of default top laners, just there's nothing for her to dodge, and so they're just like, that's cute, you're flying around, have a mace to the face, and I'm gonna stat check you because my stats are higher. That your kit is going to work really well against Syndra Q and, to be fair, Aatrox Q, and it's going to work really well at closing the gap on Vayne, that she can't deal the same kind of damage she could to like a Darius or a Garen or something, because Condemn actually does a lot to Garen and it doesn't do that much to Ambessa. It's like, well, she becomes a mid lane assassin if she doesn't have the target agnosticism to say, actually, your damage is not high enough to kill Vayne or Ashe or whatever in a single combo unless you're comically far ahead. But what you are going to do is the disparity between killing a Garen and killing an Ashe is like massive. It's probably 3-1 in some cases. Okay, we have to bridge that gap with max health damage, with arm penetration, and it's still different. But that's okay. When Ambessa is fighting Ashe, people are probably peeling her in a 3-on-3 or something. When Ambessa is fighting Garen, it's probably a 1-on-1. And so it taking 3 or 4 rotations to kill a Garen is expected. And that's fine. And in fact, the lifesteal on her kit is there for exactly that reason. Lifesteal is a very small fight skewed durability mechanic. Now, it has the ability to be very frustrating. This is something that I am worried about, is that Ambessa games that snowball have her at full health almost all the time. The last playtest game I played of Ambessa, I had the Aatrox matchup, which is like right now like plus 1.5% on live. It probably is going to grow over time as Ambessa players learn how to dodge better. But that is a favorite Ambessa matchup. I played against a player who is normally much better than me in top lane, and I clowned on him because the matchup's favored. And once I got ahead, it was comical because I went Bloodthirster second, I think, and was full health after every fight because I was ahead, and so I ult the Ashe and kill her, and through killing Ashe, dealing the 2,000-ish damage required to kill her, I healed for 800 of that through my Death Stance and Bloodthirster and Triumph, and I'm like, I'm full health again, and I'm like, wow, this is going to be very frustrating for the enemy team, and indeed it was. I was out healing Aatrox because I built the healing items, right, Death Stance BT, and I'm like, wow, this has a chance to be very, very frustrating. But what it also does is it says Ambessa has a very strong durability profile in small fights, where the damage coming in and damage coming out are much closer together, and so lifesteal is a really big deal. When 4 people hit Ambessa and Ambessa's doing 1x damage coming out, that's way worse calculus. And so it's a way to skew Ambessa toward 1-on-1s, right? Again, keep moving this direction of she's allowed to be a good side laner, she's allowed to be good against other fighters, and so hey, here's another mechanic that does that thing. Another one that I don't think I saw complaints about it, I also didn't read every Reddit post or anything. Hey, why does she have energy restore on her passive? So I actually was the one who suggested we give her energy as a champion, because it seemed like the kind of flow we were going for on this champion was that she needed to... We wanted her to stop to actually land auto attacks in between her combo to a certain degree, also being a little bit forgiving, right? You can stack up to 3, you can kind of bank them for a little while. That's intended. It kind of copies Silas in that regard. But it seemed like what we wanted here was this like level of either required downtime or having to stop to do something or you run out of gas. It's like, well, energy does really well. In fact, like Lee Sin's whole pattern is that you can't really just spam your abilities. You need to stop and auto in between, and that works really, really well. I think that's really successful, and it seems like that's the shape you're going for, and we put it in, and we kept it instantly, right? Like, we added energy once, and then never took it out. And so I'm like, that's really cool. I had a good suggestion there. It's kind of neat. But ultimately, it's here to say that, hey, and I also suggested tuning the energy cost so that she ooms on 3 casts. So that, like, she literally can't use her entire kit if she doesn't stop to auto. She can QQE, and then if she didn't reach you, if you got away, she's out. She literally can't dash anymore. She's done. The recharge takes a while. She's got several seconds where she just can't press any buttons anymore. And so if you somehow can lock her down, you blind her, you stun her, you root and walk away, whatever, her passive literally times out. It lasts for 4 seconds. It refreshes on cast, but like, okay, if you ever get to disengage for 4 seconds at the last cast, she is now at 70 energy, and I guess she can W again afterwards, but like, she can no longer do a chain of dashes. And one could argue that cadence is maybe too close or too far away or too slow or too fast, whatever. There's a case to be made there, sure. I'm not going to tell you that we've perfectly landed every single cooldown and duration here on this kit. I don't think that's true. But the point of this existing is to say that, hey, you will run out of gas on 3 spell casts, exactly 3. And if you do not auto attack, you are just out of gas, and you've got to find a way to get back to it. And I thought, again, energy fit that really well. And this is building, I know I'm kind of repeating myself, but like, it's there for that flow to say that not only do you have to cast your spells, which have normal cast times basically, but you have to also stop to land your auto attacks, and that gives a decent amount of readability. That you can see her energy bar and see the chunks move wildly up and down and understand how many spells she probably has available as a result, and all that I think is pretty valuable. So anyway, that is a brief overview of why Ambessa has some of the mechanics that she has. I thought that was a reasonable discussion. And so there you go. Alrighty, so of course, Bounties went live about 2 patches ago. And as I had mentioned earlier, it is hard to get enough data to know what to do about bounties until time ticks down. So I want to address a couple things that I've seen. So first of all is the oddities of extra community scrutiny. So I have seen a number of complaints from streamers or Reddit posts or whatever, where it's like, wow, I can't believe bounties are so broken. Why does this thing exist? And it's like, well, this thing you're complaining about has existed for the entire history of bounties, which is, why is the losing team's Malzahar have a bounty on his head? Well, it's because he has 4 kills, and he got them since his last death. And that's been true forever, that bounties were kill streaks. The difference would be that if Malzahar had started 0 and 8, 4 kills would now never give him bounty. It's only because he only died twice beforehand that he got out of the negative and got a bounty on his head. Now, you might still think that he still shouldn't. Okay, fine. I added a mechanic for that. Is it maybe mistuned? Sure. But one thing I just find very strange overall is that basically the number of bad edge cases actually lower, like explicitly this has to be true, because you don't get a bounty on your head because the enemy top laner has bad farm while you're the AD carry. The old system did that. There's screenshots of like pro games where Ashe is down kills, down CS to the enemy Jinx, but because Jinx's top laner isn't farming, Ashe has the CS bounty because it was comparing the average CS of the enemy team. That can no longer exist. Jinx will always have more bounty than Ashe in that case. And so I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I do find it very weird how I'm seeing more complaints on an objectively better designed system that I'm not saying it's perfect, because it's not. But it is interesting how telling people, hey, we've updated bounties, suddenly everyone cares and is applying a magnifying glass to this stuff. And again, there are things to fix, but I just sort of think it's very, very weird. Anyway, one thing I do want to point out, though, that is different from last system is the total value of like kills overall is lower. And I actually have the math on this now, which is the total gold earned from kills and assists, not counting bounties. This is raw kill gold, which means we're counting negatives as well and neutrals, but we're not counting bounty payouts, is down about 4%, I think, across the like entire game by the end of the game, basically. And so this says that actually, yeah, we are on average slightly devaluing kills over time. By a very small amount, and that, you know, slightly less baseline kill gold is given out in the game, which was intended, right? And what that means is what this is for is to say that, hey, the winning team is going to snowball a little bit less hard because they're going to earn a little bit less gold from kills, especially in games where they're blowing out one lane really hard. That appears to be true, again, just on average, taking like an entire patch worth of games in every ELO on a single server and saying, look, show me every single game. It's about 5% less gold from kills, 4 to 5% by the end of the game. It's also 5% less from assists. Those are 1-to-1, which is why I know we're measuring like baseline kill gold, not bounty, because those would be much more disparate, but they're in lockstep here. So that was intended, right? It was intended to lower the amount of gold coming out of that. And then, yeah, okay, we're also then, because we actually got really huge gains in terms of the rate of snowballing from the item efficiency changes back in 19, that I felt we had room to play with to actually lower comeback mechanisms, to say, hey, you know, when you're winning the game, you're allowed to just win the game. One thing I find very odd is that, like, people are mad they don't have strong enough comeback mechanisms when it's like, you were losing. At a certain point, you deserve to lose. And I think there might just be a mismatch of intention here, or just, you know, people have their own opinions on what's meant to happen, but it's like, someone posts a screenshot of like, why does this 13-3 Aphelios have a bounty on his head? And it's like, well, because you cashed it in. It's done now. Like, it's done. You got the money. You're still down 10k because you were losing, and you're still losing. A single kill is not meant to turn the game around. That's not what this is for. You're supposed to be losing. You're losing the game. You're still losing the game. You got to shut down to pull it closer, but you're losing. And it feels like there's some people who are like, no, I killed the Aphelios. I want to win the game now. It's like, no, you screwed up for 18 minutes straight. You're losing. Again, not to say that the tuning is perfect, but there's a certain amount of this that I'm pretty sure, even if we're at a state where I believe the tuning is good, and maybe many other players would also then believe the tuning is good, there'll also be players who are like, I can't believe my 10-0 Master Yi has bounty on his head, and I can't believe this 8-2 Darius doesn't. It's because you killed him. But I mean, we'll see, right? I'm not trying to strawman this too hard, but there is a certain amount of like, you're just supposed to lose at a certain point. These comebacks exist to give you something to do and bring it a little bit. But like, yeah, if you're down 40% of the enemy team's gold, you've just lost and, kind of give it up. Anyway, it's kind of random stuff there as like, hey, I think some of the consternation over bounty changes is a little bit overblown. Whatever, though, again, there are things to fix. Let's talk about them. So the first thing is bounties from kills will accrue faster next patch. So this is, I think basically the math is it's what we shipped was for every 4 gold earned from kills and assists, you would earn 1 bounty gold. Now it's for every 3.5 gold earned from kills and assists, you will earn 1 bounty gold. I ran the math on this, and what's funny actually is based on like, what's interesting is if we prorated kill gold like sort of appropriately, technically the rate at which bounties accrue right now is identical to the rate at which bounties accrued the patch before, except that many of these like 8 kill cannons have been killing the 100 gold Fiora in their lane, and that's the thing I was prorating. I was assuming that you're getting a couple of assists here and there, right? So 10-0 and 0 and 10-0 and 6 are going to be different numbers, which wasn't true before. But that like also, I know you're now getting only 100 gold in your kill sometimes, and I'm expecting that to be a lower bounty value, right? Like I'm explicitly lowering bounties in some cases. And so what this ends up meaning is that in a lot of cases, bounties will actually accrue faster than in 0.20. I would say in a decent portion of cases, the amount of bounty on your head relative to the amount of gold you earn will probably be a little bit higher than in 0.20. But that said, what this means, and this is basically just coming down to, okay, I've seen enough screenshots of the 8-0 cannon or the 10-0 Ezreal or whatever, where it's like, players would expect 700 gold on their head, even if the incoming gold was whatever. And part of this as well was like, I didn't have a great guess of like, I know how much gold people get from farm. Like it's not hard to like expect the amount of bounty on someone's head. That's not difficult because the math is all there, the data is all there. But I'm like, well, okay, I've made bounties from kills a bit lower, kill for kill, but I've also said you just directly gain bounty from farming, and so somewhere in the middle there, you're gonna have more bounty than just doing the kill math, right? At the end of the day, what it comes down to is the bounties on people's heads looks a little bit low for performance in the road to 700. Like explicitly the road to 700 bounty, that does feel a bit slow. And this just requires lots of games because like we've play tested and it's very, very rare somebody is 10-0 in the playtest, right? This is not how this goes. And so we didn't have a lot of samples of this, really. And especially because like some of the 10-0s are going to be getting every lane and it will be 700 on their head. And then some of the 7-0s are going to be killing the same guy 8 times and there won't be as much. And it's just, I've seen enough of the 8-0s without 700. And I'm like, okay, we can bring this up a little bit here. And this will generally mean that the road to plus 700 will be faster. And that'll be the case here. And so this will be plus comebacks because champions doing well will have bounties on their head faster. This is explicitly only the top end, the bottom end when you're negative. That is unaffected here. The road to 100 and the road back to 300 from 100, unchanged here. Next thing is objective bounties are going to cap higher. So again, I mentioned earlier that part of this was reducing both sides of the equation. I intended to not only reduce snowball from kill gold and reduce snowball from earlier with item efficiency, but also I wanted to reduce comebacks because we had the room to do that so that when you're winning, one misstep doesn't throw the entire game back away. And it's actually part of why I rebuilt the logic of objective bounties to make a little bit more sense, care about all the objectives again, and just some math fine tuning to make the inputs into objective bounties align more with what actually caused you to win the game. And the end result is that we actually do have slightly fewer objective bounties now than before, from what I can tell, from what I've seen, which was intended. I actually expect that to be a little bit true here. But regardless, when you change a lot, all of the underlying math of the system like that, basically, although it's still the same inputs, the math is all changed, that like there's some variance is going to happen. It's just going to be true. And so basically what this basically does is just say, look, if you are extremely just completely blasted in terms of gold lead, you will get more objective bounty. Basically it just says, and the weird thing is I don't think it's actually correct, but this is what players look at. And here's the weird thing that I have to kind of reconcile with a little bit is most players just simply look at gold lead and say, it's a gold lead. It happened, the thing. And there's two tough things about that. One is like dragons absolutely matter and have real value and actually contribute to victory. We can pretty reliably model like win rate from gold leads and win rate from dragon leads, and then mathematically apply like the right amount of value to getting a dragon. But most people just like look at their, post-game stats graph and go, see, we're down 8,000 gold. And it's like, well, you're down 8,000 gold, but you have the first two drakes. You actually have more combat power than that gold suggests. Yeah, you're not close to soul. That's fine. In fact, dragons are literally worth less if you're on the losing team. That's into the objective bounty stuff. That was already there. I didn't build that. But like, people, I don't think it's intentional, but they're just like not that sophisticated about this, even though it's correct. And so it's like, I didn't choose to say, hey, let's make this system less sophisticated. Let's rip out everything but gold and say, if you're down gold, gold for turrets. If you're down gold, gold for dragons. And, we could have maybe said that dragons themselves have some kind of innate anti-snowball measure. Maybe. They kind of do already, but I don't know. I didn't, like, this project was not take a step back, think about the entire system of comebacks and which ones they should be. It was like, hey, let's rebuild them to be slightly better than they are now. And this means that maybe there are some weird things, left on the table that like bounties could be better here. I'm spending a lot of time circling around the point. Let's kind of get back to it. At the end of the day, gold differences will contribute more strongly to objective bounties in cases where a team is extremely far behind. This will not happen a lot, but it will happen some. In the most extreme games, it will contribute a lot more to not only bounties turning on, but how strong the bounties are themselves. And so the maximum payouts for killing a turret or a dragon or baron can be higher and whatnot. The other thing, and this is actually probably the biggest one here, is I chose a very, very, very safe tuning for bounty devaluation for the losing team. I chose a very safe tuning. And the end result was players were like, why the hell do I have a bounty? I'm on the losing team. And that was like the bit of feedback that I thought was most strongly like relevant and fair and reasonable. And so we are swinging really hard. In some cases, the devaluation is 4 times as strong. It's at least twice as strong in all possible contexts. Well, I mean, I guess if it was already at 0, it'd still be at 0, but whatever, right? Devaluation for being in the losing team is going to be significantly stronger next patch. You will still have cases of being a 10-0 Master Yi, your team having bounties, objective bounties, and you will still have a bounty on your head. I could pretty easily choose tuning that says objective bounties are on, all champ bounties are 0. Maybe that should be true long term. Maybe we should really swing that hard and completely suppress champion bounties if your team is losing by hard enough. I mean, that's true, but the question is, how far behind is far enough, really? And you may disagree with me on what is correct here. In fact, I might just be wrong in saying that it's only cut by like half, roughly, the moment objective bounties turn on. You might think it should be stronger than that, but that's roughly where we are with this. And again, if this still feels like there's too many bounties, it'll probably have to wait until probably 15.1 and not 14.24 for that change, but committed to tuning bounties to make sure they make sense to players. And that, the thing that I agree with most strongly is that, yeah, actually the losing players who are doing very well should have much less bounty on their head. I'm glad we added the mechanic, right? The mechanic is there, it's working, but it was probably tuned too weak. So it's getting, again, 2 to 4x as powerful as a mechanic. All right, let's go on to the next thing, which is Aurora is getting a patchwork set of changes in this patch. Now, my belief is that Aurora is probably the strongest mid laner in the game. I know I made the call that it was Yone in heading into Worlds. Aurora was, even with the nerfs, Aurora is better than Yone, so I was only correct about the second best mid laner, unfortunately. But Aurora was really commonly first round red side ban. She has maintained a very high ban rate, and Aurora, when accounting for champion mastery, is in fact overpowered in every elo. Low and high. Of course, if we look at generic win rates for Aurora, she's pretty good in like Emerald Plus and like pretty low win rate in lower MMRs. Now, to be fair, these changes are not the nerfs. This is not coming out of live pod saying we're going to fix Aurora's like balance problems. She's a little bit OP. She's not extreme. She's maybe the best mid laner in the game, sure, but like not by a huge degree. Now, anyway, this is work being done by her champ designer to try to align her strengths more with the goals. So this is more or less a direct quote from his goals when he emailed out the first round of changes before all the iterations, but this is to make her more of a medium difficulty mage. This is not to make her Lux by any means, but also not trying to make Quay or like Azir here. And the apparent win rate growth by champion mastery on Aurora is on the high side. It's definitely well in the top half of mages. Many mages have really, really shallow mastery curves here, and Aurora is among the steepest. And so some of that on a pure data level is driven by her being kind of new, but some of that is now she's actually one of the harder champions to play. And so the goals are to quite literally make her a bit easier to play. That just directly, those are some of the goals here. And while we're there basically doing that, again, from the champ designer, and I'm going to paraphrase somewhat, but also give my own kind of spin on this, this probably will do some level of nerfing her in higher elos, pro play, things like that. And so, though this is not the nerf, really, like, or the nerfs, there's a decent chance this is win rate negative in higher MRs, and there's a decent chance it's win rate positive in lower MRs. And again, we'll take a step back, we'll get our data again, and if we need to make more changes based on what players are doing in pick and ban, based on what we see in terms of win rate data, then we will make changes as needed, right? That we're totally fine to do that. But at the end of the day, Aurora is not critically on fire balance problem. It's not a huge deal. This is, again, a set of changes aimed at aligning Aurora's strengths with the intent. Okay, cool. So it is simplifying and removing mechanics that aren't needed, basically, right? Okay, so the passive no longer gives move speed when you trigger stacks. That's pretty much straightforward, right? Running fast is something that better players are better at, dodging skill shots, whatever, so bam, that's gone. Passive no longer gives move speed on its own. Q has a decent set of changes. It's going to have 50 more range. It's going to have 5 more flat damage on both Q1 and the return missile. The cooldown right now is going up by 2 seconds. That might get cut a little bit. It might go only up plus 1 second. We're gonna see. And then also Q2 will automatically recast at the end of the duration. So this is one of those, like, hey, it's just wrong to not recast this, so like just give it to her for free. It's just, if you forgot, here you go. This brings up the very bottom of the master curve a little bit by not making you forget to use Q2. I think pretty free there, right? And overall just being like, hey, lower cadence, right? Again, slower champion, more range. So, right, you're looking a little bit at like the Lux style things of slightly longer cooldowns, right? Slightly less input requirements, but, you know, punchier when it happens. Cool, right? W no longer resets cooldown on takedown. So again, one fewer thing to have to think about. Base cooldown is reduced by, I think it's 4 seconds here. I forget the exact number, but I think it's about 4 to 6 seconds. So you get more of them, but you're not getting a reset on takedown, even though you are a bit burstier than before. The change here, though, is that the W is going to grant you a bespoke amount of move speed on button press. I believe that move speed is level scaled because you max W last, and so it's not rank scaled. It's going to be, I think it's linear. I don't know, actually. It's going to be some level scaling on this move speed, and the math in this move speed ends up being roughly the amount of move speed a like normal amount of gold income max stacked Aurora passive would give. So it's, you know, on the high end of move speed that she would normally have, but also if she doesn't press W, she gets none of it ever. Well, asterisk there in a second, but so she's much slower on average, but when she gets W, she is much faster. Well, she's, you know, peak fast, right? Peak fast to live, while, you know, for every other point in time being slower than that. So, right, she's clearly slower, accounting for the passive and everything else. Gets to get it back in some cases here. Because it does get to hit W more, sure. But again, no reset on takedown, a little bit easier to play, and arguably if she W's in to go get a burst kill and kill somebody, she does not have W to get out. She cannot one-shot you, then also leave to full safety. If she WRs in, she's out. She's out of stuff. You can just fight her back. And so the hope here is that we also reduce some frustration. That would be a positive here as well. So, you know, there's some upside here. E, very simple change, plus 50 range, exact same as Q here. Just, hey, she can play from a little bit farther away, a little bit safer, a little bit more tools there. Not much else to really bring about this one. Obviously, again, she doesn't have the move speed from the passive, so she's much less mobile. She is farther away, but she's much less mobile, and so I think this counteracts reasonably well here. And then the R is now going to give you the W move speed and not an empowered version of the passive move speed. So I believe on average, this will be you are running less fast during R than before. So again, a bit less mobility here. The big change, and I'm a really big fan of this one, is these two lines together. I'm a really big fan of this one. A lot of us here are like, yep, this is absolutely a good change for her. The duration is being increased back to pretty close to the old levels. I think it's 2 to 4 seconds. I forget what she shipped with, but much more duration here, so that she can play around in the ring a lot more. Yes, of course, this is a pretty high skill mechanic, but also this is like the cool thing Aurora does, and so her bouncing around in the ring, I think, is just like such a free win. Like, this really should try to have a long-ish duration that you can kind of play that. But the big change is that the R ring for enemies is simply a slow. It doesn't trap you anymore. So instead of being Camille ultimate, it's the box. Of course, the damage is still on cast. The ring comes out, and if the ring hits you, you take damage. So she's still just like getting the straight up nuke, like it's Cassio R or something. But if you need to leave, you can leave. Yeah, you're going to be slowed. I guess maybe you can like try to arcane shift or whatever, but like you can actually just get out. which I think is a really, really big deal for reducing frustration because I don't think the like ring out into you're actually trapped now, that ceremony, I don't think is actually very well telegraphed. Like the difference in VFX when it's forming versus actually you're trapped, I don't think is very strong. It's unfortunate we couldn't solve that, but oh well. It's my opinion. Maybe other people disagree, but the fact that you can be like, oh, she ulted, I can walk away now, is I think going to be huge for player frustration. Huge for like feeling like you can do something about this Aurora who's trapping you in. Like, yeah, there's still a pretty big slow, and she can still QE you, and like she can deal plenty of damage. She's actually doing more damage this patch, right? She's literally doing more damage with the Q here, and the range making that she can reach that more reliably. Yeah, sure, all that stuff is true, but that's the set of changes, right? I'm a very big fan of pretty much all these directionally. Again, long term, does she maybe still need nerfs? Yeah, probably true. That's fine. We'll do that when it's time for that, right? We'll do that when we can measure the results of what this does, and we'll have 5 days like we do with any given thing. Of like, thing comes out, measure on Monday. Does she need -1%? If so, okay. If not, we're chilling for a little while. And so we'll see. Again, I think these changes are all very good directionally. I think the design work is really good, and again, the goals are kind of on your screen here. Talking about them, I think good changes to Aurora. Next, there was some patchwork that I did on Rell. So this is, the primary thing was actually that her CC chaining was a little bit egregious. I think the mid scope was really good in terms of making her spells better. Like new Q is way better, new E is way better. Like those are good changes, right? But ultimately she has too much crowd control right now to where she has like really, really very reliable full hit confirmed combos where you just chain CC'd for like 4 seconds. And that's relatively frustrating. It's also pretty elite and pro skewed because if you lock someone down and your hands are Gumayuchi's hands, well, it turns out not being Gumayuchi for 4 seconds is the best thing you could possibly do as the enemy team. Right? Like, you turn my hands on 4 seconds, doesn't matter nearly as much, right? And so, generally speaking, it's not that, like, Rell is Giga Pro jail by any means, but she just, those strengths are too pronounced. And what I do think is true, and this is me as a Rell player, I think she's my second most played champion of the last year or so, is that so many of her other tools have been really, really floored because we haven't touched her CC. And we kind of need to because she doesn't have room for anything else on her kit to feel good and have good numbers and be like the thing she's good about. And to me, these two things are she is a tank. She should feel good about being a tank and not flash WR ballistic missile. Her best solo Q build by far is go cooldown boots and get the inspiration mastery so you can get your flash cooldown to like 350. So you can just like flash WR every time it's up. That's like all the champion does and it works really well. Got, kept me in masters. And she's supposed to be fast, right? She literally rides a horse, like on purpose, like half the time. That's just a home guard animation. Like she needs to be fast. We've had to like chip away all this random stuff, and so hey, it's free up the room to make the kit feel better in a lot of other places. And then so that was like the primary driver. But while I had this work, I was like, look, I've played over 100 games of Rell in the last year. I really like this champion. I want to try to make this champion feel better because there's things that really annoy me as a pretty dedicated Rell player. Some of her stuff feels really bad, especially dismounted form. She sucks at clearing wards. She like feels terrible in dismounted form. Those are the pretty much big things there. And then some really minor stuff. There's like complexity that just is there that doesn't need to be there. I'm a very big fan of deleting mechanics that they just don't do anything. I'm going to try to say an adage here, and it's like, if you need to nerf something to the point where those numbers are no longer relevant, why is the mechanic even there? And so that's kind of how I feel about this kind of stuff. And so there's a number of mechanics on E that's like, yeah, these are here, but why? And so I basically just simplified E. It's still like the same spell, but just is easier to read because half the mechanics are barely there and just don't need to be. Okay, so what are the changes here to Rell? Okay, well, we've nerfed her crowd control in almost every single situation. The Q stun is reduced by 1/10 of a second. It's from 0.75 to 0.65. The W crash down was actually only using the knock-up type of crowd control. So you'd be knocked up for 1 second. You were done like with the actual, fly into the air, then land, and then skid as the target, not as Rell, within like about 1/3 of a second, but you were stunned or you were disabled in type knockup for the next 0.6, which means tenacity did not affect Rell W. Sorry, the crash down didn't affect crash down because it was a 1 second knockup that, again, you were done being knocked up, but it doesn't end it. It doesn't remove the knockup on the end of the move. It just says you're still knocked up and unable to act. And so I broke that apart into a 0.4 second knockup so that the animation can finish playing. And that is overlapped with a 0.8 second stun. So that if you have tenacity, if you have 50% tenacity, that zero point 0.8 becomes 0.4 and ends the same time as a knockup. If you have 90% tenacity, it's still a 0.4-second knockup. This is what I believe is the correct way to do these layered CCs where there is an animation but also a stun, is start the stun at the very beginning, unless there's a special reason not to. I'll get to that. Actually, I'm not. But there are some reasons why you would tack a stun at the end instead. Ambessa R does this for a very specific reason, so she can act first because it's an ultimate and she's allowed to be biased in an ultimate. But like, in general, if you have some kind of displacement plus stun, I think you should usually start the stun at the start. So that tenacity works the way you expect, which is crash down stuns for 0.8 seconds. If I have some percentage of tenacity, I should actually drop the CC duration by that actual factual percentage, right? So the 0.8 seconds starts when it hits. Okay. Mount up, that one actually was coded fairly. It, however, was a 0.4 second knockup into or overlapped with a 1 second long stun. That spell does not need to be a 1 second long stun for how reliable it is. And so that stun is 0.6 seconds long. That is a substantial decrease in CC duration by 40%. That is a pretty big deal. And so Q and both Ws have been dropped by a very meaningful, 15 to 40% of the total CC durations, plus the fact that Crashdown now actually respects tenacity in a fair way. Obviously, this is pretty meaningful. We actually expect this to not be that much win rate overall. A lot of times, like Crashdown into Q, though it was a hit confirm, you were often wasting a lot of the CC duration. What this means, though, is that Q into Crashdown is flashable. If she Q flashes you, you can flash before Crashdown hits you. If you don't have tenacity, Mount Up Q does hit confirm. If you have any tenacity, Mount Up Q no longer hits confirms. Crashdown hit confirms Q if you hit with the end of Crashdown, and they have low tenacity. So basically what this means is that in lane, she's still pretty disruptive and does really similar things to like Kai'Sa and Ashe or whatever, where it's like, if you have flash, you can get out. If not, I'm still going to land my Q on you. If you have Arcane Shift, you're going to break a lot of the combos. That's going to be, or you're Severin, you can spell shield. You can break a lot of the combos there, even off of a Q flash. And then in pro play, or actually, I don't know if to say pro play, but just like in later game situations where you're team fighting, and there's like a random Udi with Merc Treads, Q flash W no longer hit confirms. You're just out. Or whatever your combo is going to be, those aren't going to be the case anymore. And so a lot of your later game, there's a guy with Merc Treads or a Stair Gauge or whatever, your combos just aren't going to stun and a stun and a stun. And that's, obviously a pretty big nerf, right? That clearly matters. This was, again, the goal here. But those have been really broken apart. R is still full power. That's still really good. I thought about, retuning that. In fact, I rebuilt the logic of the spell to be very, very easy to retune if we want to in the future. The strength of the initial pull, the strength of the ongoing pull, those are now just like trivially easy to change now by going into her data instead of actually looking into the script of the spell itself. Those are hard-coded, now they're not. Minor stuff there. Ultimately, again, no change there. And that's like basically the primary nerf. So what we're going to do now is talk about what we gave her back. So this is basically the primary like reshape of where are your strengths coming from. So we're going to start with armor magic resist, right? So her total resists are different now in several ways. So first things first, in dismounted form, her bonus total armor MR has been increased from 12% to 15%. To go along with that, her base armor and MR, basically her base stats armor magic resist has been lowered. The math here says that while you are dismounted, you are basically normal tank levels of durable. But also, if you still resist from passive or get more resist from items, you are tankier than most tanks in the game on at least a resist perspective. Per point of gold, of course. So, okay, while you are mounted, you are in actual practice tankier than most tanks per gold. Okay. If you are dismounted because your base stats were nerfed, you are now squishy. In fact, you are squishier than skirmishers, you are squishier than divers, you are certainly squishier than tanks. Of course, you still are going to buy things like Locket and Zeeks. You're still going to have your passive, but you're going to be clearly the squishiest tank support while mounted. You are going to be the tankiest tank support, as long as you've used your passive and have items, while dismounted. So a reshape of stats and the throughput there. Also, a very minor thing about this X3 is the amount of steel coming through her passive is very, very, very slightly increased. Not by a large amount, but a little bit higher. Next thing is there's two changes to her attack speed. So one, I simplified her basically underlying like attack speed rules. She has some weird stuff around her hit timing and her attack speed scaling that I understand was done on purpose by either her initial designer or her midscope designer. I don't know who did this, but I couldn't find anything that really felt like this was meaningful, and it didn't feel like she needed to have like specially worse attack timing than other tanks, and so I gave her better attack speed growth. I buffed her like hit timing on the attack. I buffed the like frame on it, so it's like basically in all instances her attack is overall faster. This is driven by it's really, really miserable to kill wards in horse form. Because of course you have to walk around the map in horse form because you're faster there, but you have no attack speed and your attacks feel like ass when you're in horse form. And so I was like, okay, well, you're not going to be Nautilus levels of slow. No one's Nautilus levels of slow. Sorry, Nautilus, you're special here. He's just intentionally very like laborious. That's just part of his design. But Rell, I'm like, okay, well, you can just be like generically okay at this. Tarek's still going to be better. Leona's still going to be better. Enchanters are going to be better. Like, that's fine, but like, let's just not be horrible. And so, of course, in horse form, she is like okay-ish attacks, and it should be noticeably better to clear out wards. Not by a huge degree. It's not gonna be like, oh my gosh, the champion saved. Which is like, this felt bad. The other change, though, is actually I have slightly decreased the attack speed gained while dismounted. And that's because the value of attacking has gone up, and a lot of other things have been changed about mounting up as well. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. Dismounting. So the passive, as I mentioned earlier, the amount of resist stolen from the passive is going up a little bit. Don't get your hopes up. It's not huge, but it's a small increase so that at least you can steal always at least one armor MR instead of it starting at 0.8. Again, it's very small, but it's a bit more. The other change is actually she's doing bonus on hit damage. Now, on hit damage is just simply a percent of her total resists. What that means is, I'm stealing resists by using my passive. When I'm dismounted, I gain attack speed, and I get bonus armor MR when I'm dismounted. So this whole passive loop is, let's heavily reward stealing more resists, using them better on myself, and now I'm using that attack speed to even deal more damage with it. Now, to be clear, this is not a very large increase in damage. This is not meant to carry a lot of win rate. It's meant to kind of complete the loop on what dismounted form is about, which is taking a meaningful amount of resources away, empowering yourself up with them a meaningful amount, and like using that to drive a fair bit of dueling. Now, the first version of these numbers that we playtested made her just able to completely scrap with anyone. If there's any fight, you just dismount and right-click the AD carry and you just win. So the numbers might look a bit conservative. Trust me, it's actually pretty strong. Turns out when you steal 5 armor MR from the opponent and then deal, I don't know, like 9 extra damage per auto attack, it's gonna be less than that. But deal a meaningful lot of extra auto attack damage, and you have the highest attack speed in the game of that lane. Unless someone's got like Tristana Q on. Turns out you have a really, really, really good dueling when you also have the highest resist in that lane because it's just on forever. So these numbers might look pretty conservative, but it really does have a meaningful throughput. You absolutely have really good dueling while dismounted. I moved the E passive to the W. Because dismounted W has a passive saying you're slow and you gain bonus armor MR and you gain attack speed. Mounted W has a passive, but it's held on the E. Technically, this means that, like, I think it was done on purpose because it meant that Rell didn't have a like meaningfully inflated move speed at level 1 by learning W. Ultimately, I did other changes that got around that, and so it's just on the W. When you're mounted, you get bonus move speed. In fact, the bigger change is that you get bonus move speed flat out. Instead of it being some move speed when you're out of combat and then halved when you're in combat, it's just, here's some move speed. Now again, because I nerfed her base stats, she is the squishiest tank in the game when dismounted. She is also the fastest tank in the game when dismounted. And then similarly, she is the tankiest tank in the game when dismounted. She is the slowest tank in the game when dismounted. There is still functionally less move speed when dismounted, but it's different now. So Rell is no longer self-slowed by 10%. Now, she does have 315 base move speed. For comparison, Nautilus is 325, so she is the slowest champ in the game by 10 move speed. Flat out, basically. There's not a champion slower than her when she's dismounted. So 10 move speed does make her the slowest champion. However, I will promise you, it feels so much better than being slowed by 10. Actually, maybe it's down by 15. I forget. Maybe she has 310. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter that much. The end of the day is that's different from being nerfed by 33 move speed and then more based on what else was going on because it was a percentage base, right? It was 33, but then if you had boots, it was like 38. This feels so much better. Now, again, you are still kiteable, right? Dismounted Rell is slower than every other champion. unless she has boots or whatever going on, presses or E, something else like that. But the feeling is, I'll tell you, as a Rell player and other supports who have played this kit, feels so much better to not feel horrible while dismounted. I mean, it's just a really big deal in terms of feels. I have felt dismounted. W felt terrible the entire time. Technically, yeah, she's slower than Nautilus by 10 or 15 move speed. This feels so much better. Like, and the fact that you just are better at scrapping than everyone else while you're doing this, like, to me, it feels like, oh, when I'm dismounted, I feel good because I'm clearly tankier, I'm a little bit slow, but I win every 1v1. Okay, I'm mounted. I'm clearly the squishiest champion, but I'm also faster than everyone. I'm as fast as burrowed Rek'Sai. Like, let's go. Yeah, so it's basically just like, it's moving the situations around. And that is basically what the W is about, right? It is to more strongly play up what those roles are doing, giving them a meaningful downside and giving them a meaningful upside. And the hope is that the downsides don't feel terrible. I don't think dismounted move speed feels terrible. I think mounted durability feels fine, because if you're mounted, you're expected to get out a lot of the time. You're expected to be fast. You're not meant to sit there tanking while mounted because your stats just aren't that good. And I think players can drive that. This is not like meant to make Rell easy necessarily, though we think the fact that dismounting doesn't completely crush you is going to make her a little bit easier to play so you don't misplay as hard. But yeah. Then the minor thing is the E simplification, right? So again, the passive move to W. Nothing much to say about that. It's just pretty easy. The bigger thing, though, is the E move speed no longer ramps up. So keep in mind, the E move speed on live ramps up from 75% effectiveness to 100% effectiveness over 2 seconds. And the buff lasts 3 seconds. So, your 20 move speed buff would be a 15% move speed buff. And that 1 second, it was a 17.5% move speed buff. And then at 2 seconds, it's finally a 20% move speed buff. And it's like, why are we waiting 2 seconds for 5% move speed? Why is this here? Why are there these other numbers to upkeep and whatnot? That seems very silly. And so I'm like, it's just move speed. Like, we still keep the going forward, going back, because that's actually very relevant. What I found was that mounted Rell could press E and run away. Or sorry, unmounted Rell could press E and run away, and she was way too fast. Like, I tried a version where it was just like 20% move speed or 25% move speed, whatever. I was like, nope, this is clearly unacceptable. The running away move speed is nerfed in most contexts. It is a flat 10% move speed while running away. That's not terribly fast, and it means that unmounted Rell will occasionally outrun a Leona sometimes, but it's a pretty short duration buff with a moderate cooldown. She's generally not outrunning people. Of course, her running forward move speed is very, very good. And one thing I want to point out, though, is because this has been front-loaded, right, because the move speed no longer scales with rank, it is very, very strongly encouraged now that every Rell will max W. Most Rells already max W. Thing is, W's rank ups were ass, and so it was actually always correct to max E on Rell. Most players didn't do it, even pros, weirdly, but it was like, if you actually read your tooltips, you would know you should clearly max E. And that's why, like, a lot of our nerfs to Rell, because I did most of them, was nerfing the E rank up, because it was like, oh, players getting trapped by, like, not playing their champion correctly. And so we just loaded everything on W, because, like, W feels like the obvious button. Basically, it's the kind of thing where I just don't think when you look at Rell, you're like, ah, yeah, I'm playing a tank, I'm gonna max the short-term move speed buff. It would be like maxing trample on Alistar. It's like, that doesn't make sense. Why would you do that? Like, that doesn't ring as intuitive. Or like maxing rocket jump on Tristana, right? Even if it was like mathematically correct, it doesn't fit the champion. And so I just like, yep, it's all on W. You're clearly maxing W. In fact, the passive move speed on mounted W is a rank up on W, not a level up incentive on E. So again, it's heavy simplification. What this means, though, is that the rank ups are cooldown. Great. Cooldown incentives are very easy to understand and grok, and you totally get what you're getting out of that. You feel good about leveling them up, but you don't feel like you have to rush this. And I moved the damage over to be exclusively max health damage. I always find it really silly when spells have like 10 damage on them. It's like, why is this here? Especially if you're not going to max this. Like, I can understand if you like, oh, it's a total AD ratio. Like, I think Vi E has 0 base damage because it's like 110% total AD, and it's like, yeah, sure. It has 0 base damage, but really has like 85 base damage, right? That's fine. But this is like, no, it just, you press E, and then you have an explosion that deals 10 plus some number, and it's like, why are we doing 10 plus some number? And so I just moved it to say it's max health damage. The damage is increased. She's generally slightly better at killing a tank. right? And I mean, this is the entire champion, right? So she's like actually scrapping with things. She's shredding armor MR. We've basically increased her max health damage. Congratulations, hooray! Rell is a little bit more threatening in late game fights because when she's fighting the level 15 Udyr, that hit's going to do like another 3% or 4% max health damage, which is clearly better than the 40 base damage it had. So, yay. Basically, again, simplification. So E is a simple ability now. It's got a cooldown. It's got a mana cost. It buffs her and a teammate. Her next hit does max health bonus damage. That max health is an AP ratio. And she and her teammate get bonus move speed when they run towards enemies or each other. And it gives less move speed when they're running away, when they're, not meeting either of the other conditions. Not much else to say there. It's a more straightforward ability. It doesn't ramp up with weird numbers. There's not some vestigial like 25 base damage somewhere. And you get a cooldown rank up because I think cooldown rank ups are really safe and just, generally speaking, worth having. And what I hope is going to be true here is that now we have space to balance Rell and we can just kind of move numbers around and actually feel good about them because we have the space to do so. End result is, we think, pretty close to win rate neutral, somewhere between plus or minus like 0.7% win rate. Not a huge amount here. If she's a little bit OP, that's fine. I feel like we have the room to nerf her in ways that aren't going to make the champion feel bad. So excited about that. Okay, final set of changes for this patch is a patchwork on Smolder. The goal is to get him out of pro jail. We had to really, really brick Smolder for Worlds. He still got played a decent amount. No, Smolder has been one of the most popular champions, and it really sucks when you have to pro jail them. There are some champions, by the way, who are like not very appealing, and so them being in pro actually kind of saves their like popularity. Smolder is just popular on his own because he's really like awesome champion. Even now, who's like pretty weak, is still like an incredibly popular champion. So get him out of pro jail. And I mean, I expect Smolder to be like a perennial like top 5 pick rate. Like, you look at what you see out of like Kai'Sa and Jhin and Jinx, where like these champions are and Caitlyn and Ezreal, like those are the top 5, which is like they're always popular, and just one of them cycles into first place in popularity because just they're the most powerful for the time. I think Smolder is going to be in that echelon. Where like, yeah, at some point we get the tuning wrong, and some champs can be the best at the game. Sometimes it's been Kai'Sa, sometimes it's been Jinx, sometimes it's been Ezreal, whatever. I think Smolder is actually one of the elite 6 here. Anyway, tactically, how do we get Smolder out of pro jail then? Because if we could snap our fingers, great, right? We'd have room to buff him. He's weak, accounting for mastery in every MMR. Well, we nerf his stack scaling. Basically, pros are better at stacking than other players. Now, Smolder is actually one of the more... So Smolder's mastery curve, basically, right, is... The road from like first game to around 30 games or so is steeper than most AD carries, and then it just pretty much fully stops. Now, again, that 1 to 30 is actually steeper than most other champs in this role, but there's a lot of AD carries. I'd say about half that also stop after about 30, 50 or so games. That's actually relatively common. But because Smolder's really steep here, it's like actually he has some win rate loss based on not everyone's got those 30 games in, right? Not everyone's like mastery 8 or whatever or higher on Smolder. Sure, right? That said, that's not a problem. It's okay. The fact that his master curve is flat by the end is a good thing. Like, we expected Smolder to be relatively approachable. It's fine that there's things to learn. Obviously, Smolder has unique mechanics, learning how to last it with Q and how to optimize that. Yeah, it's all expected, right? So it's not a problem that Smolder is like more complex than your average ADC, and of course less complex than maybe like an Ezreal or a Kai'Sa, where there's actually a very, very long tail, though somewhat shallow mastery curve. That's fine, whatever. Not a complaint, just a statement of fact. But hey, can we, again, just like make changes that allow us to balance Smolder to be fair in solo queue and not OP in pro play. So the infinite scaling on stacking, right? The average game of League of Legends for the last 2 years has consistently been, the median League of Legends game has been between 27:30 and 29:30. For 2 years running, it's been plus or minus that 2-minute window on basically every patch in ranked solo queue forever. It's remained there. We're keeping it there. We're happy with that game length. That is the median game of League of Legends, about 28 minutes long. Median pro game is much longer than that. I think it's around 32, 33 minutes. I say much longer. That's very meaningful. Because that's a point in time where Smolder has enough damage to clearly one-shot waves and infinitely stack. And stall things out and be a late game behemoth. And so any sort of like... he uniquely scales in this way that, bypasses gold scaling, right? And so we're pretty sure that this is the kind of thing that's really, really pro skewed. Okay, I'm spending a lot of time on this one. Let's move on. Lower level scaling. Smolder, when he's seeing pro play, is mostly being seen as a mid laner and then sometimes as a top laner. And I know right now in solo queue, he's also got a pretty decent amount of mid and top lane play. His plurality role is still bot lane, but I have a suspicion that Mid laners and top laners are pretty sad they see Smolder win their games as often as they do. Even though he's not winning very many games there, I'm pretty sure these people feel bad about it. And again, Smolder has a very, very large audience in bot lane. I'm happy to just like shove him into bot lane again because that's who he's made for, that's where his players are, and he's way easier to balance when he's not a pro play flex pick, right? So we're lowering his level scaling. We're moving that around, of course, but it means that he's going to get less power off of leveling up, which is something that, of course, mid laners and top laners do more often. Duh. The biggest thing, actually, I think the single biggest tactic bucket here is nerfing his wave clear. We're nerfing it very, very hard. We had a playtest today. Smolder could not full clear midwave with RWQ, and he was at like 200 stack Q, so he's getting like the bounces. That's a pretty big change because like just R clears waves on live right now. So that is a really, really big deal. We are heavily nerfing Smolder's ability to stall games out. That is actually, I think, part of what makes Smolder a not fun to watch pro play champion. He's really good at stalling out the game. That's not great. We don't love that. We've nerfed wave clear a lot over the years. This, I think, has been a little bit crept here on Smolder, and so bringing it back down to a meaningful degree. Okay. And of course, hey, there's a lot of nerfs, right? The champ is already weak in solo queue in every MMR. So we're going to buff his gold scaling by a lot. Some of these AD ratios are getting more than doubled. Actually, more than two visibilities are getting more than doubled AD scaling. And we're also doing some stuff with mana to try to, it's a buff that is meant to do the kind of the right things for him. And again, we would like to maintain him as a relatively easy scaling champion, right? Once you learn how to stack with Smolder, you're kind of done. And he's, you're training the dragon, right? He's going to be big and strong one day. And so he is, I think if we're going to say, hey, snap your fingers, make, which AD carry should be the strongest scaling AD carry, it's Smolder. Right, his theme is literally around becoming more stronger with time. Like Aphelios is a scaler and Jinx is a scaler, whatever. That's fine. Like I don't have a problem with those being true. But Smolder's actual theme is I'm a scaling champion. If he's not top 25% here, it's a grief. So yeah, he should be a scaling champion. All right. So what's happening? Well, we're nerfing the passive on Smolder Q 3 places. We are nerfing the flat damage per stack by 0.1. Okay, whatever. We are nerfing the blowback in 2 places. One, we're nerfing the number of missiles coming out of it by about half. So it's, I believe it's 3 missiles exactly at 125 stacks, and then every 125 afterwards is +1 missile. Before it was every like 67 stacks you get 1 missile. It's not a very big deal. It doesn't really do that much, but it's just like kind of easy a place to take power away from. The bigger one though is on the blowback. The damage on blowback is being cut from 3/4 to half. That is a really, really big deal. I think carries a lot of power, a lot of teamfight power, a lot of frustration, and doesn't carry a lot of satisfaction. At the end of the day, when you're playing Smolder, like your Q explosion will one-shot the melee minions, and then we just expect you to press Q a second time to kill casters. That's fine. If your Q isn't enough to kill the melees, okay, you have to kill them with 2 Qs instead. Basically, we're just going to say, you've got to kill casters yourself, you got to go cast your 3rd Q. That's definitely real and happens to his wave clear. It's fine. It can be played around. It's not a very big deal. But the bigger thing, though, is I think blowback Q is really pro skewed because pro games are much more likely to have strong, efficient battle lines where you hit front line, and a decent number of the time you hit back line through front line. Solo queue games are chaotic, and there's a Talon flying in and a Twitch jumped in from stealth behind you, and you're just 1v1ing a guy. And so as much of the Q power can go into the 1v1 power and less about ambiently damaging other champions who got caught in the Orianna shockwave or whatever. This is a very big deal in terms of his damage throughput in pro play, and a much smaller deal in his damage throughput in solo queue. The third change to Smolder Q is the max health damage burn no longer scales on stacks. The AD ratio has been increased by 1/4, so it's going from 2.0 to 2.5, but it no longer scales off stacks. And so the gain from going above 225 stacks is no longer increasing max health damage. It's, again, half as many blow-up missiles. It's less flat damage on Q. It's also less flat damage on E. In general, the passive is going to be less valuable. So that, yeah, any good Smolder player can get to 225 by the end of the game. The difference, though, is that pro games go to 400, solo queue games don't. Those 400 stacks are going to be much, much less important. The second change, or second set of changes to the queue, is total AD ratio has become bonus AD ratio. Of course, the base damage has moved around, but it means that level 9 is the spike for Smolder Q damage, and then you're relying on gold to go the rest of the way up, which means a level 9, level 18 Smolder don't have different Q damages. You just have to have more gold, which of course bot laners will acquire, and mid laners will be higher level. Off a similar amount of gold, don't get me wrong, but we'll have to acquire that. We're also nerfing the minion mod from 1.1 to 1.0. There is no longer bonus damage on this queue. This means it requires a little bit more to set up the last hits there. Yep, that's going to be a bit more of a learning experience. Your, last hit thresholds are going to change a little bit. You'll get there. It'll be fine. Keep in mind that, again, there is a pretty significant buff in the bonus AD ratio here. It's from 1.0 to 1.3, and that ratio still scales with crit, so you can get easily above a 2.0 ratio on every cast. It's a lot of damage. You can get a lot of damage here. At the end of the day, it's just a bit less wave clear. And the new mechanic getting added is a mana refund if you kill a minion with Q. If you kill a minion with Q, you get back 15 of the 25 mana that spell costs. So that means if you are playing Smolder in top lane or mid lane and you're queuing the Yone or the Cassante on cooldown to get it stacked as fast as possible, you can still do that. You've got to rely on mana runes, and it's going to be a little bit tough, and you've got to get your tier or your Essence Reaver or whatever. If you're playing bot lane Smolder and kind of minding your business and getting stacks, you are going to basically you're going to like regen more mana than Q costs in not quite all cases. It's not quite true. It's going to take a long time to run out of mana though. And so it says if you're peacefully, farming and doing well and getting your stacks up, congratulations. You are playing, you're playing your job out correctly. Good job. And the nice thing here is it means that if you are going to attack the Smolder, yes, he's getting a stack by casting Q on you. He's getting a stack by casting W on you. However, it means that Smolder is now running out of mana. And it means that we can tune his mana pool down or tune his mana cost up a little bit. It's this lever existing at all that lets us say, hey, there is finally a tax for interacting with champions. Of course, we've made it a bonus, right? It's a bonus for if you don't have to interact with your opponent. Smolder wants to scale up. He's not meant to be a lane bully. He can need to survive his lane and get a stack, sure, that's fine. But if basically the long-term version of this says that, right, as we need to tweak costs or whatever, if you can make Smolder attack you instead of stacking, you can maybe him. In the way that, if Gangplank queues you instead of minions, he's not getting Silver Serpents and Gold. If he has to queue you instead of minions, he's not getting stacks, right? And so this is the kind of thing where I think it is wise to try to force your opponent to interact with you when they're playing the Infinite Scaler. It's like, no, I'm going to go attack you. There being something there that says there is something lost when you have to go attack the champion instead, I think is a good thing. For the playing against experience of this champion. It also feels really good to get queues, and stacks on enemy champions, but the waiting here is relevant here, right? Next up is W. W is getting minus 10 cost at rank 1, plus 10 cost at rank 5. Basically, this is just here to say that as Smolder, trying to proactively interact with your opponents with W is there. Congratulations. Not much to say. It's just the cost will be low enough that you can feel good about trying to harass, and it's actually kind of correct to press that button sometimes. It's basically a feels positive thing. We've nerfed the minion mod on W from 140% to 100, so it just deals full damage to minions. Also shifted the damage very, very heavily. Instead of the damage being mostly in the missile and then very lightly in the explosion, it is split 50-50 in the missile and the explosion. Without a minion mod here, it means that you're doing a lot less damage to minions with this spell. It is a lot less damage to minions. It is a very, very big drop here. In some cases, as little as half as much damage. Now, the change, though, is that the total AD ratio of the spell is being changed from, the combined bonus AD ratio of the spell is getting shifted from 0.5 to 1.2. It is a very, very large gold scaling increase. I expect his core build to be Essence Reaver Shojin. It's, good haste, get some mana, but go get bonus AD instead of going Trinity Force Mana Immune. It's go crit AD because, again, crit multiplies your buffed AD ratio on Q, buffed AD ratio on W, substantially so. Shifted more towards building slightly squishier high AD caster items and not into Trinity whatever. A minor thing here, by the way, on the passive burn, AP ratio removed from the passive burn. So AP ratio gives you W explosion damage and R, and that's it. So AP Smolder is gone for now, basically. It won't be good. So the Leandry's tech is gone for pro flexibility. But yeah, really big buff to the AD ratio here. Not much else to say. That's basically the shift. Otherwise, W is kind of the same spell. E change is much like W, getting a massive buff to its AD ratio. It is getting changed from 0.1 total AD per stack to 0.25 total AD per stack. So a 2.5x AD ratio change. This is a 2.4x AD ratio. So really, really, really substantial buff to the gold scaling here. This is 1.3x, of course. The stack scaling is getting plus or minus. So what's shifting here is the flat damage per stack is getting dropped from 0.2 to 0.1, but the number of shots per stack is going to 1 per 100 instead of 1 per 150. And so you go from 5 to 6 to 7 shots a little bit sooner. Again, the AD ratio has been more than doubled, and so the AD ratio per stack has been even more than doubled. It's been like, tripled or close to quadrupled at this point. The base damage has been adjusted to kind of make room for this, but at the end of the day, E is just clearly a better spell. And the end result here is that, like, a full duration E will do about as much damage as other spells. Now, you're still not attacking for the 1.5 seconds or 1.25 seconds this thing takes, but of course you also get to move during this time. So you're losing an attack, but you're also gaining a bunch of mobility. So the end result is that E deals about a full spell's worth of damage, which should make it actually worth using a bit proactively. We could buff this further, of course, down the line if we need to. That's a real possibility. It's just I'm always afraid. I'm like, can I buff this by triple? That seems extreme, even though maybe I could have been able to do that. I just was a little bit afraid, and E is only up to the level of it's one spell. Again, maybe it should be higher, but that's where it is right now. As again, shift to attack scaling, I'll stay here. And then the final set of changes are to the R, right? The minion mod is 50%. So R, of course, sweet spots, and it sweet spots for 1.5x damage. And it was basically trivial for Smolder R to do like 780 damage to the minion wave, which meant that the casts were clearly dead, the melee minions were very, very low, and then W was, of course, trivial to land. And so W, with its pretty high base damage and 1.4 minion mod, meant, of course, if Smolder R W'd, the entire wave was dead. R deals half damage to minions, flat out. That 800 damage is now 400 damage. And that's, a pretty late game Smolder R. So that's substantial less damage here. Again, the W getting dropped from 1.4 and the damage being moved in the explosion. Big nerf there, of course, as well. Q, the 1.1, minion damage ratio, that's being dropped to 1, as well as the blowback getting cut by about a third as well. It's a really, really big nerf to his ability to wave clear. The primary nerfs are your wave clear is much, much worse. Your infinite stack scaling, which doesn't exist in most solo queue games, is much, much worse. I basically pegged the numbers I chose for the burn, just to talk about some numbers real quick, is 225 3-item build Smolder is almost identical. But if you build high AD, it's better than before. Of course, if you are really, really high stacked, it's worse than before. But if you shift your build over to high AD, you're going to be having a better burn. You're going to be having just strictly higher spell damage on Q, W, and E. R is unchanged, aside from, like, I guess if you built more attack damage, you have stuff there. There's a very, very minor change, is buffing the rank 1 or rank 2 cooldown of R to be a flat 120 seconds. I think there is definitely a time and place for longer than 2-minute ult cooldowns. And in a world where Smolder was like infinite wave clearing, yeah, it's a really good reason to knock something down. But now that's not really abusive on minions anymore. Congratulations. You get a, still fairly long for an AD carry, right? Most AD carries have pretty short cooldowns on ults. Whatever, Smolder's is 120. It's not a long time for AD carry. Jinx's is shorter. Ezreal's in practice is shorter because of his Q. Draven's is shorter. Whatever. Pretty sure Draven's is shorter. Pretty sure. Anyway, whatever. Point is, the goals here, right? The tactics here are meant to retain Smolder as a scaling champion. He is now caring much more about his gold than his stacks. And to be fair, I think these gold ratios aren't even heavily pushed. They are pretty good gold ratios, but they're not the most extreme things you've ever seen. There are champions who scale with gold even sharper than this. And so this is putting Smolder up to a pretty good spot here, and just, picking numbers that I think are reasonable, that very clearly shift what we're doing. We're all pretty aligned here internally that this should do pretty well at reducing pro skew. These tactics make sense. These goals make sense. And the end result is that Smolder's underpowered. We can buff him, and with our fingers crossed, are pretty confident we're not going to inject him back into pro play with, fairly straightforward buffs. So if we get it wrong, we can get the tuning right. It's okay. That's not hard. The point of these changes, again, are the shape to make this champion balanceable for solo queue for the average player. That's it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.